Here is the scene. A man enters a meeting room carrying a thick, bound document. He walks to the table, places the file carefully in front of him, and waits. Across from him sits one of the most powerful political figures in the world, a leader known for dominating conversations, controlling headlines, and shaping the direction of Western politics for years. But in that moment, something feels different. The man holding the document doesn't rush to speak. He simply waits. And in that quiet pause, before a single statistic is mentioned or a single argument begins, everyone in the room senses that the balance of the conversation may already be shifting. What unfolds next is more than a diplomatic exchange. It becomes a moment that analysts, economists, and political observers will likely study for years. Not because of dramatic shouting or heated arguments, but because it reveals a powerful contrast, the difference between raw political power and careful preparation. Welcome to World Decode. Today we're breaking down one of the most fascinating geopolitical encounters of recent years, a meeting that took place during escalating tensions between the United States and Canada. To understand what happened in that room, we need to rewind the timeline. The conflict didn't begin overnight. The dispute developed gradually as economic pressure increased between the two countries. For decades, the United States and Canada have maintained one of the most integrated economic relationships on Earth. Canada is America's largest export market, and the two countries share deeply interconnected supply chains. Manufacturing, agriculture, and energy sectors on both sides of the border rely heavily on each other. But early in the year, the situation began to change. A new round of tariffs was introduced. The measures included a 25% tariff on certain Canadian goods that did not comply with the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. Additional tariffs targeted automobiles, steel, aluminum, and auto parts. Canada responded with countermeasures of its own, placing tariffs on billions of dollars worth of American imports. What started as a trade disagreement quickly evolved into a full economic standoff. Businesses began to feel the pressure. Major companies warned of rising costs, disrupted supply chains, and reduced investment confidence. Reports from economic institutions noted that tourism, cross-border trade, and manufacturing activity were already starting to decline. Then something else happened. Canada held a federal election. During that campaign, Mark Carney, a former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, ran on a platform focused on economic independence and resistance to external pressure. Carney was not a typical politician. He came from the world of central banking and global finance, where decisions are guided by data, risk analysis, and long-term strategy. When he won the election, many observers in Washington were unsure what kind of political opponent he would become. Soon after, the two leaders met at the White House. The meeting was polite on the surface, but the disagreement beneath it was obvious. President Trump publicly stated that tariffs would remain in place, suggesting that nothing said in the meeting would change his position. During the conversation, Trump even repeated a familiar idea, that Canada could potentially become the 51st U.S. state. Carney responded calmly. He noted that some places, like the building they were sitting in, simply are not for sale. The moment made headlines around the world. Nothing concrete came from that meeting, but it revealed something important. Neither leader intended to back down easily. The next major encounter came during the G7 summit, which Canada hosted in the Rocky Mountains. By that time, weeks of negotiations had taken place behind closed doors about how the two leaders would meet again. The format was carefully arranged, limited time, controlled remarks, and a structured setting designed to avoid public confrontation. What no one outside the Canadian delegation knew was that Carney had prepared a detailed document for the meeting. The dossier contained extensive economic data, research, and analysis, covering the entire trade conflict. It wasn't written like a political speech or a list of demands. Instead, it resembled the kind of report a central banker might present to financial regulators during a crisis. It focused on numbers, economic output, supply chain disruption, energy costs, agricultural impacts, global trade consequences. When the meeting began, cameras captured the opening moments as the two leaders sat across from each other at the table. President Trump opened with a familiar diplomatic tone, speaking broadly about cooperation and the possibility of resolving differences. Then Carney began to speak. His presentation lasted more than 20 minutes. Rather than arguing politically, he walked through the economic data step by step. The report outlined the estimated impact of tariffs on both countries, including effects on GDP, supply chains, and agricultural markets. Importantly, the analysis also acknowledged Canada's own economic costs. Carney did not hide the fact that Canadian industries had been affected as well. But the report also described how Canada had begun expanding trade relationships with other markets, diversifying exports, and building new partnerships beyond North America. The message was clear. The conflict had consequences for both sides, but the long-term trajectory might not look the way many policymakers initially expected. At one point during the discussion, Trump attempted to interrupt the presentation. Carney paused. He waited. The silence stretched for several seconds, long enough for the room to feel the weight of it. Then he continued. The moment became one of the most discussed parts of the meeting. Observers later said it perfectly captured the contrast between two negotiation styles, one built on political confidence and rhetorical strength, the other grounded in technical preparation and detailed analysis. By the end of the meeting, no immediate agreement had been reached, but something significant had changed. Both countries agreed to begin formal negotiations aimed at resolving the dispute within roughly 30 days. It was the first structured timeline for de-escalation since the trade tensions began. Outside the meeting room, international reactions poured in. Diplomats and analysts noted that the exchange illustrated a new kind of diplomatic strategy emerging among U.S. allies, one focused on preparation, data, and institutional credibility rather than direct confrontation. For some observers, the moment suggested that global alliances were entering a new phase where economic strategy and careful planning would play an even larger role in international negotiations. The future of the relationship between the United States and Canada remains uncertain. There are several possible paths forward. In one scenario, negotiations succeed. Tariffs are gradually reduced, economic cooperation resumes, and both countries stabilize the relationship. In another scenario, talks stall and tensions continue, pushing Canada further toward diversified global partnerships while reshaping North American trade patterns. What happened at that meeting doesn't end the story, but it may mark the beginning of a new chapter in how major economic powers negotiate with one another. And that is why this moment matters, because sometimes the most important shifts in geopolitics don't happen through dramatic speeches or sudden announcements. Sometimes they happen in quiet rooms, over carefully prepared documents, when the facts speak louder than the politics. This is World Decode, and now we want to hear from you. Do you think the negotiations will lead to a lasting agreement? Or are we seeing the early stages of a deeper economic separation between two of the world's most connected countries? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more deep analysis like this on global politics, economics, and international strategy, make sure you subscribe to World Decode and turn on notifications. Because the next developments in this story could shape North American relations for years to come.